Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first session after lunch. I hope you had a good lunch. I didn't have really any because the lines were just too long. So there's that. My name is Matt Christensen, and I work on the Visual Studio team. I've been a product manager there for 12 years. And I want to show you some cool stuff that we have in Visual Studio. Some of the new stuff, but also some of the stuff that, maybe have been there for a while, but you didn't know about. And we know that there's a bunch of things that you don't use. And so maybe we'll shed some light on that today, and you'll be inspired to go and try these things out, and you'll become more productive and more happy as developers. Now, this is level 375. I made that number completely out of thin air because I have a feeling we're going to land around 300 to 400. But then here's what happens every time we do this. Someone in the audience, at least one person, is going to ask some questions that are like level 800. Okay? So I think when we average things out, we're going to land at about a 375 here. So with that said, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'll also leave some room at the end for questions. We got more room here up in the front as well for you coming in. All right. I think I'm asked to tell you to make sure you remember to do the eval for the sessions. I will say for sessions like this, that is, this is about Visual Studio and what's cool. There's so many sessions always at conferences, and we just get like a very few for Visual Studio. So if you want more Visual Studio content in the future from any Microsoft conference or Microsoft sponsored conference or whatever, please make sure that you state that in the comments on the sessions, okay? So that we can keep delivering all the good news of Visual Studio to everybody. All right. Did I remember to say everything? I think so, right? We have ask questions as we go along. I will make pauses and prompt you as well. So we'll see. I want to start here by showing you a web API that I've been building, or my colleague Syed have been building, to be more precise. This is we've seen this before, perhaps. This is the Swagger UI. This is or now it's called Open API. That's what that website looked like. It's actually a web API, but it does have a front end so that we can explore our APIs, right? And that's kind of just out of the box. File new project. You get this with a web API project template. But we've expanded on this. There's a bunch of stuff here, and it's kind of nice. Here's what's behind. This is my project. I got. It's just a web API. .NET Core. Can we say .NET Core anymore? I don't think so, right? It's .NET 7 or something. But I want to show you something cool. If I go to View, other windows, I need I can find something here called Endpoint Explorer. And check this out. It shows pretty much the exact same view out here. So even if I didn't have the Swagger stuff, this NuGet package that displays that front end we saw before, I can see my entire endpoint, all my endpoints right here in the Endpoint Explorer. I can open it, I can click in and it will open the file and go to the method that has the route and all this sort of stuff. So I can really very easily get an overview of the endpoints of my app. This is the Endpoint Explorer. Super helpful. But it has another trick up its sleeve. So let's go to, I like the contact one here. I'm going to right click and say generate request. I'm going to zoom out here. Generate request. Close this up. So what it did was it created a file for me here. Just with the name of my project is my restaurant API .http. This is an HTTP file. Anyone here ever heard of a .http file? Hands up. Show of hands. Come on. 3 people. What? REST. Yeah, or .rest. That's right. We can actually do both file extensions for this feature. All right. So this is kind of an industry standard. It has become slowly over the years. File type for storing your requests, HTTP requests. So here you can see one. It supports something like variables. So here I define a variable that points to my local host. And then I can simply just create a get, and in this case, my restaurant API here, API in contact, and I can just click send requests. I'm gonna zoom back out here. And when I do that, let's see here, it might be firing it off right now, or did I not click? Oh, here we go. I didn't actually hit it. It does the request and it returns everything into this right now experimental looking UI. Granted, it doesn't look that Visual Studio-esque as at the moment, but that's a moment in time. But this is kind of like Fiddler, right? You can see all the requests, the headers, everything comes back. You can test out your APIs very, very easily. So I can have multiple. So if I copy this, see here I just separate them with these three, what do you call them? Octothorpes. Or a pound. Yeah, I think they're called pound. I don't know. Okay, I'm just gonna hit another endpoint here. I'm gonna put in number 3. Oh, here, number 3 into my get request. And now I just get the one that says number 3 here, right? So I can kind of test out, I can try my API, see everything works great. And this works with the debugger as well. So I can actually execute and it will hit my breakpoints, and it's a very nice way of doing this. But I can take this even further. So let's do the octa something, Brian. What was it? Octothorpe. I don't know, man. I think you just made that up. Mm-hmm. So let's go duplicate line, Control D. And I'm going to post some JSON here. I'm actually going to make a post request. Yeah, I get IntelliSense for that. Isn't that nice? Post request. And I'm going to give it a header. Content. Let me zoom in here. First of all, I need to be able to spell content type. Application JSON. Okay? Application JSON, post request. So now, when I fire this off, boom, I get the result back. I've now created a new record called VS Live 2023, and if I go up here and paste that in here, get a new request here, you can see I get exactly that back, right? VS Live 2023. So I have a way now to document my entire API for my own consumption or my team's consumption. But I think what's really cool is that it's actually for the public's consumption. So if you have let's say a GitHub repo or whatever, and you want to share something about your APIs, you can use these HTTP files or REST files, whether you call it .rest or .http, doesn't matter, it's the same thing. And you can now use that to point people saying, hey, here's how to call my API. And this is a file that lives in your project. So in this case, it lives right here, right? It follows it's in your repo. So super exciting stuff. Absolutely love this. Yeah, and you see here the debug button right here. So if you click the debug and you have a breakpoint or whatever, it will just start the debugger and do the right thing. So very, very easy to use. These files work in VS Code as well with an extension installed, and in some other competitors' IDEs as well, and editors out there. So kind of an industry standard, very new one. But we got you covered in Visual Studio. Any questions? All right. So let's say that I'm building the web API here such that it can be consumed by a colleague of mine who's building the mobile app that sits on top of the API. And my colleague is working on some new features that's going to use some APIs that don't exist on the staging environment yet. They only exist on my machine because I'm building it because we're working on the same user story together, okay? Kind of a common scenario. So how does my colleague point his or hers URL to my local host? Short answer is you can't, really. Firewalls, whatnot. Unless you use some paid-for services. ngrok is one. There are others, but it's really not something that's easy to do. So I want to show you something cool. But what if I go up here, and I go to Dev Tunnel, and I say create a tunnel. If I show, yep, and we're going to give it a name, VS Live 2023, could be anything. I'm going to create a tunnel that allows this scenario to happen. And I want this to be just temporary. It shouldn't be a tunnel that should be open for a longer period of time, just for now. And should it be private or public? Like, should it just be within my organization? Or should anyone be able to hit this? I'm just going to do public for this one. Click OK. And a dev tunnel has now been created. All right. So I'm going to hit Control F5 to run my app again. And now we're going to be met by this. You are about to connect to a developer tunnel at devtunnels.ms. Continue. And here we are. And if you want to try it, you are more than welcome to. See if you can hit this endpoint. We're now public. My local host, where you saw this running before, is now running on devtunnels.ms instead of localhost port 7200 or whatever it was. So my colleague can now connect straight to my machine, and we can together work more efficiently in bringing out these new features, right? But not only that, if you're a web developer and you want to show progress to your manager or to someone else, you can do the same. Have you ever tried to see if your app works on a phone before releasing it to production? Well, it's been really hard, right? But now you can. Just take a picture of your browser, like I have right here, the QR code, and boom, you can see, hey, does it work on a small screen? What about my iPad? What about, so on and so forth. What about all these online tests that check for HTTP header security, accessibility? You can run all those tools now before you even commit the code, right? Because it can run off of your local machine. Did I mention it's free? It's free. So you get it with Visual Studio, whether it's Community, Pro, Enterprise, it's in the box. There are some rate limits, like you can't stream video through it. There's some bandwidth stuff here. But there will be some paid tiers where if you have those needs, which most people don't, there will be something available for you to kind of. Yeah, the question is, what about can we do custom names instead of the weird auto-generated ones? I don't know. That's a good question. I can follow up. Yes, sir. Yeah, so there's ways to hook into Azure Active Directory and literally use the roles that are defined and the whole organizational Active Directory stuff that you've got. Yep. So you can even limit it to just your front-end team or back-end team. Yeah.
So if you had
yes.
a break in your code,
if you have a breakpoint in your code, will it be hit? Yes. This website right here, even though it lives on a different URL or it's hit by a different URL, behind the scene it just proxies that call back to your local host, your local machine, right? So it is coming from your local machine. So if you have a breakpoint, it's being hit in real life. So if you're building a webhook and you want to see what happens when a live site hits your machine and you want to set a breakpoint, yep, that absolutely works. This doesn't cache anything. So nothing is cached. It's always going to your box. Yep. Cool. Any other questions for this one? This is a big one. I really love this. Are there any remote execution worries? Not to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't put something out that has that capability. Yes. Okay. No, that's true. So there's always the issue that if you give this URL to someone, and that someone could maybe there was a download button here for something that's like PII or whatever. Yes, that is true. The same way you can also take some PII information and email to a random email address or whatever, right? So that's where you select, hey, organizational authentication, or, and if it's public, then probably temporary should be better, right? And so on and so forth. But as soon as you stop your app in Visual Studio, you can't hit this URL anymore, right? As soon as your local host no longer respond, neither will this. So yeah, that's true. Yeah. So maybe put it through like a URL shortening service or something. I don't know. If it's temporary, I don't remember exactly what that means, but it might be your Visual Studio session with a timeout if your app hasn't been running or something like that. Yeah, it's short. It's not like a week, let's say, or it's not even like the end of the day. It's like much shorter than that. And you can always go in and let's see here, in your dev tunnels, there's a window here. You can see them all. You can create new ones. You can stop them, clear them, So, yes. There's another menu here. When you click that one, you can even do further port configuration here. So let's try to click it. Okay, so now there's something going on here about the inspection. I don't know what happens. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, no, I've seen this before. Yeah, so this is really cool. So what it does is it gets you the network tools that you have in Chrome or Edge, and you can inspect all the traffic that goes in. So now on the network level, just like in the browser tools, you can actually see traffic, the requests and responses with headers and everything. All right. So I take it that this is something that you find interesting, because you've been asking a lot of questions about this. So I take that as a good sign. Awesome. You like this feature? Is this a good feature? Okay. All right. Thank you. Just want to make sure here. All right. Let's take a look at my endpoints. We're talking about endpoints, right? We've been showing like the consumption of it and the sharing of them, but what about writing them? So I'm new to the team. I've never really done Web API before. I don't know the lingo, all the words that describe sort of APIs. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, what is all this stuff? I don't really know. There's something here called, let me just zoom in here. There's something here called map post. I don't know what map post is. I don't know this API, this NuGet package that delivers that method. So we all know this, right? We've all worked with NuGet packages that we've never seen before, or joined a new team that use code we don't know. So how would I figure out what this map post does? Maybe I'll Google it, I don't know. But what if I could do this? Hover over it and check out down here, GitHub examples and documentation. Let me click this, and up we get a window. And I can now see how people are using map post on GitHub. And you can see here some of them, are more advanced. They take like lambdas. Some of them are simpler. And I can see, look at the scroll bar here. So many different ways of using this API. I can even go and see, there's different overloads. And so I can see those different overloads as well. So I no longer have to exit Visual Studio to go Google for something that I don't even know exactly what to ask for necessarily, right? It's all right here. And it's where you would want it, where you would naturally come to look for it, by hovering over the thing you don't know what is, to then click down here in the tooltip, or or quick info as its technical name. Why that is, I don't know. But this is called the quick info, the tooltip here. Super handy. It saved me a lot. I do a lot of Visual Studio extensions, and those APIs are kind of difficult. And so this is something that really helps me, especially for the more the niche APIs, where there's just very little documentation. Like having those examples is like life-saving. Yeah, so the question is, what about like exposure to user rights, coding rights and permissions and licenses on the individual repos that have these samples? I believe, so don't quote me, I believe it's the same as we have for IntelliCode, Copilot. And so whatever mechanism they go through, like filtering out GPL license repos and so on and so forth, I think this is follows the exact same model. Yeah. So behind this is a large language model that is made up, I think, of exactly the same principles as the other I mentioned. Yeah, this one here. Mm-hmm. Will it look at so the question is, will it look at our own internal Git repositories in case it was our own method that I was looking for? The answer is no, not at the moment. Yeah, but that might change, right? Especially as code bases, some of them are huge, and this would be a big benefit. And IntelliCode already have the notion of training on your own repos. We have actually not seen a lot of uptake on that. So it's probably not something that's highly prioritized just because people haven't shown interest. People say that they want it, but when it comes to it, we see very few people actually using it. So I'm not saying it's not coming. It's not going to be a high priority at the moment. All right. Okay, that's cool. So now I know what this map post thing is, but I'm still confused. Like, why does this even exist? This like class here and all. I don't even know. So what I can do, I'm gonna just zoom in again here a little bit. I can come in here and hit the Alt// and just ask, what does this method do? Hit enter. And then Copilot window shows up right here. You've probably seen this before demoed. But this is super handy, right? I can ask questions. I can have the AI kind of interpret things for me. I can also have it generate code, and you've seen that before, where I can ask, hey, can you do error handling for this? Or give me the XML doc comments for this entire class, and it will provide that for you. Here's the thing that I think is really cool. I'm going to do the same thing as before. Hit this one, and you say, write unit test. Here, generate unit test. This one I might have to think about for a moment. But how often are we in this situation where, okay, we've created our class or our method, and now we have to test it. But how do we test it in a good way? And, or at least how do we get started, right? And so we can just have Copilot and the AI engine do it for us. And so I didn't specify what testing framework I wanted to use, MS test, NUnit, XUnit. So it just defaults to XUnit in this case. But here it is. I can just copy this entire thing in. Isn't that neat? So this is super fun to play with, but it also has like some real world productivity gains here. So I encourage you to check out that Copilot chat. It's pretty awesome. Yes. It is right now it's an extension you install separately. So we're looking at, that story of like getting Copilot as a Visual Studio user is not one you would expect. You would expect it to be built in, and we're looking at that's coming. But the history of how all this came together, it kind of just started with an extension, and so that's how it began its life. But it will be in the box. The same thing was actually true when we introduced IntelliCode and LiveShare back in when that started several years ago. So we've had precedents for doing it this way before, but it's going to be much simpler as we go ahead, as time progresses. Yes, that's a $10 a month, I believe.
$10 a month for individuals, $19 a month if you go through the business. Business licensing, you get additional. Understand that what that's just showing is in beta.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't announced any final licensing or structure for it yet, but today you can try it. Understand that there are two versions available, one that is fully supported and not in preview, called GitHub Copilot. If you have more questions, I'm happy to take it offline, so we don't.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. But as I said, like that story is going to simplify greatly here in the coming months. So don't be discouraged and try it out. Here's something that is in that current GitHub Copilot extension that you might already have, but we made some improvements to it. And that is that I can now go in. Here's a class, and if I start writing public string. Notice what it does here. It does not interfere. It suggests what I'm about to potentially write. It says, oh, what about a nullable string called description? It kind of fit in here nicely, and maybe that was exactly what I wanted. But what I really like about it is that it works with the IntelliSense now. Before, they kind of competed who was the most right, if you will, but now that works completely seamlessly. It's a very natural experience. If I hit tab, I still only tab commit what was in the IntelliSense list. Hit tab again, I complete the whole ghost text, that gray text that was after it. So very natural, nice experience here. I'm going to return to this file in a moment, but before I do that, let's see here. Did you notice that when I moved down through this file, you look at the top, you'll see some changes. See that? All the way up here? Called sticky scroll. This was like one of the highest voted for features on developercommunity.visualstudio.com. And what is really cool about this, especially when you have long methods or long classes, is that it keeps your indentation context so you can always see kind of where you are in the code. So as I'm coming in here, now I'm going to enter the class. So it sticks to the top now. Then I'm going to go into the public static void map menu item endpoints. That sticks to the top. And as I go down each scope, here it's the lambda, right? Each scope stays there. So that's really cool. It is off by default, so I'll show you how to turn it on. Another thing you might notice is the colors of the brackets and the braces and the parentheses. Even in C# here, even the generic, look at the generic larger than, greater than signs here, or angle brackets. They have different colors. So this is a feature called brace pair colorization. And it makes it easier to know where we are, in what scope we're in, what closing parenthesis closes what opening parenthesis, and so on. This is another one, I think also a top 5 voted for feature by you. And that is off by default, but actually in 17.7, which is coming out soon, it'll be on by default. So everybody will get it. But you can always go up here and search for, if I search for sticky scroll, here's sticky, you can see text editor. And we go in here, sticky scroll. You enable it right here, and you can even change how it does its scoping, which is kind of nice. And then you also have enabled brace pair colorization right here. So that enables those two features. Any questions for this? Okay, just a little bit of quality of life improvements here. Here's another quality of life improvement that I'm very excited about because it solved a paper cut that I've had for 25 years without knowing it. And so you might, when you see this, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I have this problem too. Okay, so let's take some code here. What about this method here? I'm going to send this to a friend, a colleague. So I'm going to take this, Control-C, copy it. I'm going to paste it into Teams, Slack, Outlook. What's going to happen to the indentation when I do that? All messed up. It's going to look terrible, okay? Because, you see here, what I should have done maybe was I should have done this. So now the indentation at least is the same when let me zoom in here, sorry. Now the indentation is the same. I have an indentation, and these are tabs, and in Outlook, a tab might be like half an inch, right? And so now all of a sudden things shift around and it looks pretty bad. So what I should have done, and what I do the second time, always the second time. The first time I come in, I do this. Oh, the first thing I showed you. I do this, I paste it into Outlook, it looks terrible. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I can't do that. I have to do box selection. So hold down Alt. Start at the top, then go out here. Oh, that was too far. Oh, And then go down, and how far down? I can't even see where I started. Okay, is it here? Could be. I don't know. This is horrible. So now I'm going to do something else. I'm just going to do the first thing I wanted to do, which was this, copy. I'm going to go into Outlook. This is the new Outlook. It's a new theme, yeah. I'm going to paste it, Control-V, boom. It does the right thing. Indentation is correct, right? This is not an Outlook feature, this is a Visual Studio feature. So Visual Studio recognizes when I copy something following a pattern where my initial indentation is different from the rest and there's no characters in the white space indentation left of what I selected, it adjusts what goes in the clipboard. But what's really cool is that if you paste this back into Visual Studio is like, aha, this was copied from Visual Studio where the indentation was actually different than what Outlook would want. So I know exactly what that indentation, the original raw copy was, and that's what I'm going to paste. So if you're dealing with so you want to be very strict in how you paste stuff, nothing changes for you. Nothing is meddling around. When you're in Visual Studio, you're good. When you're outside Visual Studio, you're good. Nay, you're great. Brian. Do we get color if we go to something that understands color? Hey, let's do WordPad, because when was the last time we did WordPad? So yeah, you get some. Let's find some nicer look. Let's just take this whole thing. I'm kind of curious. How much, we don't get the full color, but we do get, oh yeah, look at that. So yeah. Well, yeah, it's word wrap. Yeah, it's word wrap. In this case, it didn't actually do anything with the indentation because the indentation was exactly what, it's just the entire file from text buffer position 0 to max length, right, of the text buffer. So, okay, I'm just going through my list here. This is baked in, man. Here's how you get it. You update to the latest version of Visual Studio, and then, yeah, get that new theme for Outlook too. And then you just copy and paste, and that's it. It's on by default. You get it for free. This is it. This is oh, good question. Is this 17.6? It's got to be, yes, I believe it's 17.6. I could be mistaken, and it's in the current preview. It's easy to try. If you're on 17.6, you could try it right now and tell me. Someone in the audience? Okay, so it's 17.7. Teams, same thing. It does the right thing in Teams. Yep. Not in Slack. It messes everything up in Slack. No. All right. So I got a couple more here I want to run by you fast. These are some, again, so following the theme of things you have been asking for a long time. One of them being a way to very quickly just add a new file. And you might be thinking, does this really matter? It really matters. And that's why so many of you have downloaded an extension over the years that does this. And it's now built into Visual Studio. And again, it was one of the highest voted for features. So let's say I want to add a class to this project. How would I do that today? Well, I might go in here and right-click my project and then go add new item. Then come in here, loading template, wait for that. Was it a class I wanted or was it something else? Maybe I have to search for it, right? Okay, let's do class. I'm going to come down here, give it a name, hit OK, right? So that's fine if I wanted a class, but what if I wanted something, a JSON file, something else? I have to do the same dance no matter what file I do. But what if there's no template for it? What if I want a text file? No, actually there's an item template for a text file. Some other file, right? Some other text file. Well, there's no project template for it, so now I have to do a text file and then rename the file extension, and it's kind of annoying. So what if I could do something else? Just for the sake of the argument, so you understand the feature, I'm going to go back and say add new item. And then down here, it says show compact view. Now we get this. Okay. There's another way to get here. First of all, if this is the last I used, the next time I say add new item or Control-Shift-A, I see the compact view. All right, so it remembers what I did last. What I like to do is I like to do Shift F2 because that always takes me to the compact view. Shift F2. Same thing right here. So now I can add a file. So I'm going to add, what about file.cs? But hang on, what if I want ifoo.cs as well? Two files, comma separated. Enter. Boom, done. Well, hang on, ifoo, what's that? It's an interface. How did it know I wanted an interface? This is this is not AI, but capital I followed by another capital letter usually indicates an interface. So that's how Visual Studio was so brilliant that it knew that that was what you wanted. Okay? It seems like AI. Maybe we should just call it AI. And of course, if it's just file, it's a class. Right? This is what you want usually. So under the hood, it actually uses the same templates that exist. So if you add package JSON, it knows that that's the npm package file, and it will give you use that template, and so on and so forth. All right, so what if I do this again? And this time I'm going to create a folder. I'm just going to call it folder. And for this to be a folder, just end with a / or / either way. Enter, boom, and there it is. That was immediate. Okay, so let's just create a new file here. Let's create a bar.cs. Boom, it goes under the folder. It knows what I'm doing. So let's say that I am, let's select file CS. So in Solution Explorer, I have some, in the root of my project is currently selected, but I'm working on bar, and bar was in that new folder. I now hit Shift F2. I want to add a new file. Where is it going to end up? The code file bar.cs is the one that's active, but Solution Explorer has a selection that's differently. Or that's different. Actually, it doesn't because I enabled the, hang on. I enabled tracking. Or is that? Is it all languages? No. What is it? Oh, it was. Oh, yes, track active item in solution explorer. That's what it was. Okay. So now the selection is correct, right? So now the selected is still, I don't know if you can see, so I'm just going to point it out. The selection is this one, but my cursor and my activity is over in the code window, and I just hit Shift F2 to add a file. Where does it go? Does it go in the root of the project, or does it go under next to bar.cs that I'm currently editing? Who says root of the project? One person. Who says in the folder where bar exists? Most people. Okay, let's try it. Boom. It goes in the folder where bar exists. So it's context aware, right? It knows where I am, what I'm doing, what's the current active file. And so when I create a new file from there, it knows where to put it. It knows the relativity of the path. Because I could be on this file, and I can pop open this thing again, and I can even go further. I can do like a subfolder, another subfolder, and then another, let's call it file 2. And that way, I now have subfolders. Super, super easy. So this is one of those features that you may say, you know, how often do I actually add a new file? How important is this? I promise you, once you start doing this, there is no return. This is it. Yes, sir. Yeah, so what if I do a subfolder, file2.cs, comma something? So whatever comes after the comma is again relative to the current context. So that wouldn't go under the subfolder. Yeah. Yep. You can also just right-click and do it. Absolutely. Yeah, because if Solution Explorer was active, then the context has changed. Right. Well, even if you don't right-click, so if I'm here and hit Shift F2, the active item right now is not what's open in the document over here. It's what's selected in Solution Explorer. Yeah. Yeah. Add new file. Yeah. You see here it says data. You see here in front of it. It even shows you where it's going to put. Yeah, it's about like, yeah, exactly. Cool. All right, I want to show one more thing, and then my friend Jesse will show you something really cool. I want to go back to this here monstrosity of wall of text. So about 20% of time spent in a code review is spent on coding styles, conventions, coding standards. That's a significant amount of time on something that is kind of a static, really, right? It's either right or wrong, and it should be simple to follow. So we really don't want to spend 20% when we can maybe spend 0, right? Or get closer to 0. I've shared this statistics before. This is not one of our surveys, but last year a survey came out that figured out how many minutes per day the average developer write code. Not read code, not answer emails, not reading documentation, but actually writes code. And it's 58 minutes in a day. There's only 10% of developers that is more than 2 hours a day of active writing code. All this time goes with code reviews, reading code, reading documentation, all these other activities, meetings, you know. So if we can get 20% back from our code review, that would be very fantastic. And so this is in violation with my coding standards, with my team's coding standards. So, you know, I can format the document. do all sorts of things. Maybe maybe my team is really cool and we have a .editor config file. How many people here know the concept of editor config files? Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details here, but it's a file that's industry standard. All tools out there understand it and applies the coding standard rules that are defined in there. It's like an ini type, very easy, like an ignore file. It's like that sort of format. But you can set up any rules that you have for your coding standards. And there's a lot for like .NET and C++, like, hey, do we want using statements in a certain order? Or do I want to prefix my member variables with this dot or me dot in VB? All this type of stuff. And if you have one in the root of your repo, Visual Studio will honor that and apply it. But how does it do that? And how do I remember to do that? So here's a thing that we know that you don't use. And this little this little broomstick down here, you've probably seen it and been like, whatever. Let me show you what it does. It's called code cleanup. And I can configure rules. And we've been adding a lot of rules recently. What did I do? I'm just close on. So I'm going to hold down Shift, go all the way down. I'm going to move all the rules up. So now I'm going to have all my included. These are fixes. These are things that Visual Studio knows how to fix when it comes to my coding standards, based on whatever settings I have in Visual Studio. But of course, if they're in editor config, that overrides any settings I might have personally. The team settings win here. So I'm just going to apply them all. Click OK. So now I can come down here and click that button, or Control KE, and that applies all those rules automatically at once, very quickly, to my file. And I can even go in and if I wanted to, if I go to settings and I go to code cleanup, I can even run this when I save the documents. So maybe I want sort of a lighter weight thing for like not all the rules when I save. Maybe that's how I want to do it. Completely up to you. You can mix and match these things. There are more than one profile. So that way I will never forget to adhere to my coding standards, right? And so I get my 20% back. So I can write some more code. How many people here knew about code cleanup? Okay. Okay, a couple handful, that's good. So, yes, question? Does it save the editor config file? No, this does not. This doesn't touch the editor config file. It reads the editor config file and tells you what are the rules for, should you use, in C#, for instance, a rule for should you use var or a strictly typed name instead of var, right? So it will run that fix in your coding profile if I say, hey, run this rule. But that rule might be defined in your user settings up in Tools Options somewhere under C#. But if it's also specified in your .editor config, then your editor config rule, like strongly typed versus var, decides what that code cleanup will do. Okay? Otherwise, you'll just do whatever is default if you don't do anything. And so it might be fine with var, I think, out of the box. But you can set all these things, and this will just apply whatever rules that you have defined. Yeah, so really, yeah, so you can actually do that if you add a editor config file to Visual Studio. I think it will actually take the defaults of Visual Studio and put in there. There's also some repos out there that has a lot of editor config files. There's even a website that asks you questions. Do you want this or that? Like, do you want var or strongly type? And you just answer, and it just slowly builds up an editor config for you. So there's a lot of resources for this. Just a simple Google, and you should be ready to go. Yeah. All right. Speaking of ready to go, Jesse, we are now ready, right? We have our clean code. We are ready for our code review. And so now we're going to do some Git work. And Jessie here from the Git team, she's got some really cool stuff to show.
Cool. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to just switch out computers.
Yeah, let me take that.
Awesome. And not only do I have a time limit, I also am not plugged in to power, which is risky, but it'll mean I'll go as fast as I can while showing you all the things. Awesome.
You need power?
My charger's in there. I think I've got enough for now, so we'll be okay. My name is Jessie Houghton. I am a product manager, program manager on the version control team for Visual Studio. If you joined me for my session yesterday, you might have seen some of these kind of tips, tricks, Git integrations. I focused on GitHub yesterday, and there will be a few more to show today. So if you were there, you didn't catch all of it. To set the stage, I've set up some changes, and I have my Git changes window open here. If you're not using the current Git integrations in VS, we have them separated into those tasks that you're doing while you're coding. So you're pulling, you're syncing, you're pushing, you're staging, committing, etc. And those are all going to be living like right next to your code. I like to keep it tabbed with Solution Explorer. And then you have your focus tasks, which are going to be in your Git repository window. And that's going to be, I'm digging around to figure out where a bug originated. I am new to this repo, and I need to understand the structure of a particular set of changes, etc. So I've got my Git changes up. I've made some recent changes, and I want to review those changes before I'm ready to create my commit. So I'll go ahead and double click. And this is going to take me to my diff view, and you can see at the top, and let me zoom in for a little bit more visibility. We've got a comparison here between my index and my working tree. So this is comparing what's been lately committed to my changes that I'm working on right now. I can go ahead, I can even edit in here because this is a working window, and it'll track my changes for me. What I wanted to show you in here is our line staging feature. This is a version of interactive staging that you get in the command line. But what it's really great for is reviewing your changes and making sure that you're not checking in anything that you didn't mean to. So maybe you had a console log statement that you were just using for your own testing, and you don't actually want that to go into your repo. So as I'm going through, I can look at each change and stage the lines that I want to change, and that'll update in my Git changes window. I can look at the next file and make sure that I'm keeping all the changes that I'd like to keep. You can see by my comments that they're very important changes that I want to make in my repo. And I can also make sure that I undo anything that I don't want to change. So I don't want this to go in, and I've got that undo that allows me to get rid of that change. I know everything else is good to go, so I'll go ahead and finish staging that. And now I'm ready to write my commit message. Now, at this point, if you're using Azure DevOps work items to keep track of your stuff or GitHub issues, you might be hopping back to the browser to go ahead and copy paste that issue link. And today, you can just tap the hash button, wait a sec for it to think, and you've got your list of GitHub issues or Azure DevOps work items available right for you in Visual Studio. I can even kind of narrow down what I'm looking for. It'll automatically update as I'm searching for the particular item. And let's make sure that I've got an example to show here. Go a little bit bigger. I've got a pull request also that's showing up here. If you're working with GitHub issues, it kind of treats pull requests and issues similarly, so you can tag those items in the same way. So I'll go ahead and just tag one that is related to whatever feature I'm working on here. And then I'm also going to go ahead and use the closes keyword for GitHub. When I merge this pull request, it'll go ahead and close that issue for me. If you've got the automation set up, it'll change your status on your GitHub project board as well. And then if you're using Azure DevOps, it'll be the fixes keyword. And this is going to allow me to have that all ready for my commit when I am good to go.
Just a quick one. Fixes work on GitHub too. That's what I use. I didn't know you could use closes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So fixes works in both DevOps and GitHub.
Yeah, and if you forget, you've got a tooltip that'll remind you here what that keyword is. The other thing that you can do, if you're a keyboard user, you can activate that with your hash, but if you want to type the, click on the hash button, we've got it there for you. Okay. I covered line staging and the issue and work item search. If I wanted to go ahead and kick off another build here, I might get stuck and have to wait for that build to complete before I could do anything else in Visual Studio. But we've unblocked committing during build, so you can go ahead and get that running as you go. I'm not going to run that now just because of time, but let's go ahead and take a look at something really new that I've really appreciated working with. If I am doing that deep archaeological work in my repository and I want to understand what went on in the past, I might want to check out the commit details. In the Git repo window, you can probably see there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and I want to make sure that I can use my full screen view to take a look at all of that. So if you didn't catch that, I was using our maximize button here. So before you could pop this out into another tab, but then you lost your context in your repo. And so you can just open that up, and that's a real quick way to see your commit details and still kind of stay informed, right? If I want to close that and then move around with my cursor, that'll update for me. And when I want to focus in, I'll open that up. But with those related changes that we've mentioned over in my Git changes, I can also go ahead and see what items were related to items that I worked on in the past. And this will give me a quick way to hop out into the browser, and that'll open up that issue for me on the web. So I've got that in another tab there. The other awesome thing that we worked on in the Git repository window was allowing you to have a better way of understanding the relationship between branches in your repo. So right now we can only see one branch at a time. But if I go ahead and hover over one of my other branches, I see that I get this eye icon. And that's going to allow me to add that to my branch history. So we had a large request where people are like, how do I see multiple branches? I want to prepare my commits so I can get ready to create a pull request. And we've enabled seeing up to 5 branches at a time. There's some really quick nav buttons up here at the top so you can get to stuff that's from a long time ago. And we've got some nice color coding for you. I personally like the colors better in the dark mode, but we've got some nice coloring for you to get around and understand what's been going on in your repo. So that's another thing that we've worked pretty hard on. I forgot to commit that, so that is all committed, and then I can go ahead and push my changes. And the last thing I wanted to show before hopping over to another repo was at this point, I've gotten that little banner that says create a pull request. If you clicked on that and you're not in a 17.7 preview, that would take you out into the browser to create your pull request. But today, if I click that and I've got the right version installed, I can create my pull request inside of the IDE, so I don't have to leave the IDE to complete that last step. That's good. Yes. Let's go ahead and add my title and my description. I've got that same work items or GitHub issues support in my description box. So let me make sure I triggered that right. And I can make sure that I'm linking any of the items that I need to. You might notice there are some things missing here, right? Like where are my reviewers? How can I add that? We are working on that, and it'll be in the upcoming previews for you to use. So we're fleshing this out. It is still in preview. It's not in the GA channels yet, but make sure to let us know what you're looking for here. We're also working on Markdown support for the description box. So making sure that this is fully fledged, ready for you to create all of your pull requests. All right. I think I have a little bit more time, so let me jump over to another solution. And this is the one I'm looking for. So you might see that there's a couple odd things going on here. Maybe you're catching that I've got some very poor spelling for my math library, but I don't have to remember how to spell anything anymore because the spell checking is enabled, and it's letting me know that I have got some misspellings for subtract and divide. The other thing that you might have noticed is that my Git changes window and my status bar looks a little bit different. So let me zoom in a little bit here. It's actually saying that I've got 3 repositories that I'm working on and that there are multiple branches that those repositories are on. What this is demonstrating is the multi-repo support that we've been working on, and We GA'd that a couple releases ago. Wanted to just make sure everybody knew about it. Folks tend to use multiple repositories for a lot of different reasons. My example here has a sample API, some front end and libraries. And this might be because you want to have different access levels per repo. You have different groups working on these different repositories and you want a different way to organize them. But what ends up happening is folks will end up working on two or three repositories at a time. And they'll need to do all of those steps that you're doing in a single repository on multiple, and that becomes really repetitive really fast. So I have to create a branch for feature branch 1 3 times, and then I have to make sure that I'm pushing the correct changes to each of those branches. So let's go ahead and fix my spelling mistakes and make sure that I've got my stuff ready. So that should be good. And you can see that the rename fixed the naming of that across my other repo. And that's represented by these little icons here in the changes window. And I'll go ahead and fix my divide spelling error. And this fully works because they're all in the same solution. Your debugging will work across the repos as well. So you don't have to worry about switching or having multiple VSs open to handle that. I had a question.
Does it support multiple remotes for each repo? So can I mix and match GitHub and Azure DevOps?
Yeah, so you still have the same remote configuration for each of the repositories that you're working on. You can even change your username and what credentials you're logging in for each of them. So you've got the power to create those changes. Let me go ahead and have a commit message. And I'll go ahead and commit all of these. It's creating 2 commits for me, and that's what you're seeing up here in the corner. I have linked to both of those. And when I'm ready to push, I get this network operations dialog, and this allows me to specify exactly the order that I want to push those items. And that might be important because my CI/CD pipeline might run with one repo building first, and it depends on my other repo to have all the updates before it is ready to go. So that was all I had to show for the Git stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. What do you think? Pretty cool stuff, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, the Git tooling has really come a long way. So that's just great to see. And you saw the compare view, like the diff view, right? And so a thing that people have been asking for a long time is the ability to just diff 2 files. So I select 2 files, and now I can click compare selected, and it does just exactly that. So new feature, long time coming. You know what was the really kind of, I don't know if I would call it the funny thing about this, maybe more like tragical, is that this feature has been in Visual Studio since at least 2010. There's just never been a button for it, but it's always been there. Yeah. Was there a shortcut? Yeah. So let me show you how do you execute random commands in Visual Studio? Do you know? Just shout it out. How would you do it? Command window. Okay, command window. So if you have that, you can go and say file dot save all. That now all my files are saved. But I can say tools diff files, file 1, file 2. Oh, look at this. I have one called bar. Boom. So yeah, so this has been in the product at least since 2010. Like you could go to the command window and diff files. And now we have a button. So the funny thing was that we had, I wrote an extension years ago, and it had like hundreds of thousands of downloads. And all it did was to call that command. That's all it did. So after years of extensive testing and grueling experimentation, we finally figured out that if we select 2 files in Solution Explorer and right-click, we could put the button there. So we did. But we took it one step further, because what if the file you want to diff against is not part of your solution? That's a thing, right? Sometimes. So what if you right-click a single file, you can say compare with, and then you can select any folder that you want, or any file that you want. Yeah, so that one. Question? What about comparing files across branches? So this feature does not have that yet. I think, Jesse.
So if you're using, I don't know if the mic will pick it up.
Just talk in the mic.
So smart. So if you're using the multi-branch graph feature, you can have both of your branches open, and it'll work the same way as it does today to compare commits across like a single branch. You just control select both of your commits, and since you have all of the commits listed, it works as expected, and it'll open up the compare window for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. There's a bunch of features here that we're still playing around with. This is kind of the first iteration, but things like being able to compare inside the editor is another one, right? How do you compare your unsaved file with what's saved on disk? Like, that's one comparison. Another one is like compare 2 parts of the same document. It's another one. What's the difference between this selection in my clipboard and what I've selected in Visual Studio, for instance? All sorts of things like that is something that we're looking at adding, but it's not here yet. Okay, speaking of things that are not here yet, we are doing some things around experimentation. So if you read the Visual Studio blog, you might have noticed that we've been doing that in the last year or so, like just basically trying to see if we can come up with a solution to a problem that appears to be kind of a big one, whether it's a paper cut or not, something that has impact, something that matters to you. And so we have a couple that are, one that is currently being developed right now, and I'm going to show you that. And then one that we're trying to see if we can come up with a good solution with your help. So let me show you the first one. So the first one, let me just, oh yeah, let's just do this. So the first one is, let's say that I want to have something like this. Bar is great. Let's say I want is to be in single quotes. Like a lot of editors, you just select what you want and then hit single quote. And it does that, like as you see right here. Or if I have, like in this case, I may want to have do things with parentheses, so I can make a selection, open the parentheses, and it also closes it, right? So I can do this. So we call this surround selection. Everything needs a name because there's a title field in Azure DevOps, so this one is called surround selection. But you know this from other things. So this one is coming. I think it will be there in 17.8, which we don't have the first preview of that yet. So I just have the experimental extension installed right here. So, but that's coming. That was, I think it had like 500 votes, which is very high for us. So that's a big one. Here's another one. If you have a lot of files open, let me just open a bunch of files. So in order for me to see them all, I can't just, here's what I will do. I'll open this one. Click that, and that will show me all the files that I got open. This little chevron right here. You probably know this. It's been there forever. A new thing we have in Visual Studio 2022 is that I can show tabs in multiple rows. So if I click that, it looks like this. That button was that little gear icon at the top right of the tab well. This thing is called the tab well. That's where it is, and it's show tabs in multiple rows. Yeah. So that came out like quite a while ago, actually. It's not new. But but let me just keep opening these. See, the problem people have sometimes with this particular feature is that, you know, it does take away a little bit of your vertical space, doesn't it? Let's see here. Here, now there's four lines of tabs. So my code window kind of is no longer as tall as I want it to be. So we're looking at how can we do this such that it's kind of simpler, because maybe I don't want this on all the time. I only want multiple lines of tabs when I need to get an overview of the tabs I've got open. That's kind of the only time I want it. But it's kind of cumbersome as well to go in the menu and enable it and then disable it afterwards. So what if I could just come in and anywhere on the tabs or the tab well, if I scroll the mouse button down, it opens. Scroll up, it closes. Scroll down, it opens. If I select a file, boom, it closes back up. What do you think of a feature like this? Would this be helpful? Oh, okay. Got it. No, the thing is about scrolling horizontally, there's a couple of issues with it. First of all, we don't have a scroll viewer control in the WPF on the tabs. That's one thing. The other is, if you have as many tabs open as I do, then scrolling that way, does it really solve the problem of giving you an overview of all your files? Not as well, probably, as the multi-line tabs, right? Multi-row tabs. So this is about how can we optimize for that. Yep, question? Right. It's just the window that it's on. But this one actually also supports if you have. So, you know, if you hold down the control key, you can mark different multiple files. So right click and you can say new horizontal document group. When it comes down here, or I could have said, hey, new, or move all to previous document group, and then move to vertical tab group like this. So up here it still works, right? A lot of people don't know about the tab groups, but it's pretty cool if you have a widescreen monitor. All right, this is all that we have time for, so thank you so much for coming. I will say this once again, please take your time to click into this thing and give your evals, and make sure to let the organizers know you want more Visual Studio content, okay? We will be happy to provide it. So thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.